Good day, everybody. Welcome to the Bible in a Year 2021. We are on day 197, and we are looking at Isaiah chapters 13 through to 17 today. So, just highlighting a few things because there's a lot of detail, as we keep saying. In chapter 13, we're going to pick it up in verses 17. It's crazy that Babylon has just become a thing. Wasn't even on the radar, and we will be introduced to Babylon when we look at Hezekiah. So they're not even on the playing field, and yet here we see Isaiah talking about the downfall of the Babylonians, and prophesying that it will be at the hands of the Medes, which it was. And so look here, we see, look, I'm rousing the Medes against them. The Medes pay no mind to silver, no desire for gold. Their bows will smash youths. They will be merciless to newborns, pitiless to children. So Babylon, a jewel among kingdoms, the Chaldean splendor and pride, will be like Sodom and Gomorrah, destroyed by God. That is pretty powerful and very spot on stuff. Then we switch the page to Isaiah 14, verse 1. And again, we find the promise. We find this throughout Isaiah, through all the prophets. The promise that this time away from the land is only going to be for a period of time, and there will be a return. Even though the scriptures have said that those who come back will be very few compared to those who left. So the Lord will have compassion on Jacob, will again choose Israel, and will give them rest in their own land. Immigrants will join them and attach themselves to the house of Jacob. And also in this chapter, we find this long, it's a song of mockery, mocking Babylon. That's something, because they're about to face this gigantic military might of Babylon. It's going to be something else. And here is a song that's given to them for after Babylon's fall. And just a part of it here, it's just a small part. Now you've fallen from heaven, morning star, son of dawn. You are cut down to earth, helpless on your back. You said to yourself, I will climb up to heaven. Above God's stars, I will raise my throne. I'll sit on the Mount of Assembly on the heights of Zaphon. So it has to deal with the arrogance of what would become the Babylonian Empire, which will not last very long at all. It seems that they were raised up for this purpose, to house the people of Israel for a period of time. And then after the exile, it isn't long after the people return, that Babylon is no more. And there's a promise here for the oppressed of Judah in verse 27. The Lord of heavenly forces has created a plan. Who can stop it? God's hand is extended. Who will stop it? So just in the same way that he gave the promises of the correction of the exile, he's also giving them with that same authority the promises of their return. So they are to have hope. And some of the prophets will write to them directly in exile to encourage them there, that it's going to be for X number of years, 70 years, and then you'll be brought back. So settle down, make a life for yourself until it's time to come back. And then we have some of the prophecies that Isaiah was to give to the various nations. And so to the Philistines, Ahaz was not kind to the Philistines, and so there's a prophecy here to the Philistines that they shouldn't rejoice because the one who would follow would be just as hard on them. So don't rejoice, all you Philistines, that the rod that struck you is broken, because from the snake's root a viper will grow, and it will produce a winged creature. So mightier will be the one who follows than Ahaz himself. Ahaz wasn't all that mighty. He was really a lousy leader. And then we have, for Moab, the Moabites, who were the descendants of Lot. And so they weren't kind to Israel. They were a nemesis to Israel. And so an outcry sounds within the borders of Moab, as far as Eglam, a cry of distress, as far as Beer Elam, a cry of distress. The waters of Dibon are full of blood, but I will bring still more upon Dibon, a lion for Moab's survivors, for the remaining few in the land. That's pretty severe. But then this is interesting, because it sure sounds like to me here that the Lord is saying that the hope that remains for the remnants of Moab is Israel. Let the outcasts of Moab live among you. This is in chapter 16, verse 4-5. Let the outcasts of Moab live among you. Be a hiding place for them from the destroyer. When the oppressor is no more, when destruction has ceased, when the trampler has vanished from the land, a throne will be established based on goodness, and someone will sit faithfully on it in David's dwelling, a judge who seeks justice and timely righteousness. Now, over in chapter 17, Ephraim, some people get confused about Ephraim, but Ephraim was also the name used for Israel. So it's we have various names that get applied to the northern kingdom. Samaria is the capital, but often the land is referred to as Samaria. It's referred to as Israel because it is most of the tribes. So it took on the name Israel, whereas Judah and Benjamin took on the name Judah. But it also had the name of Ephraim. So where you see Ephraim referred to, it's referring to Israel. And Ephraim and Aram had some agreement there for a little while. Sometimes they partnered against Judah, but quite often they were enemies of each other. But nonetheless, this is what was given to them in verse 3 of 17. Ephraim's security will cease, as will Damascus rule. What's left of Aram will resemble the glory of the Israelites, says the Lord of heavenly forces. And the glory of the Israelites was nothing. They were destroyed. And then we read this in verse 7 and 8. And we all understand that in a crisis, when you're in a crisis situation, those of you who have been in a crisis situation, only the important stuff matters. That stuff of a lot less importance falls away, and you're just left with the important stuff. So we read this: on that day, people will have regard for their Maker, and their eyes will look to the Holy One of Israel. They will have no regard for altars, the work of their hands, or look to what their fingers made, sacred poles and incense stands. So they'll be left with genuine faith. They will be left with the one creator, Yahweh. And that's what happens in a crisis, because all the things that people lean on that absolutely have no power, no strength whatsoever, just crumbles. And those of us who worship and walk with Yahweh know his power is real and his presence is real. Then in verse 13, we need to understand that the nations, as much as they look like they're mighty and threatening, they are nothing to Yahweh. China is nothing. Russia is nothing. The United States is nothing. England is nothing. Anything that you may consider to be some sort of superpower in this world is nothing compared to Yahweh. Verse 13, nations roar like the roaring of rushing waters, but God will rebuke them, and they will flee far away, pursued like chaff by wind in the mountains, like tumbleweeds before a storm. And that's important to remember, because as we look at this whole deportation and everything that's about to happen, understand that it's the Lord who raises up these nations to deal with other nations, as he lifted up Israel, as he grew Israel and brought Israel in to deal with the 7 nations. He's lifted up Babylon to come in and deal with a number of nations here, not just Israel, but a number of nations, as we've seen. So yeah, it's important to remember that his hand is over these nations. Okay, guys, you be blessed, be encouraged. Thank you very much for being part of this with me today. And I am looking forward to the time we have tomorrow. God bless.